Let me find my document. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've been kind of ruminating on the fifth and sixth kingdom from Elder Parmenter's studies on determining the borders. So I went through and gathered a few of his comments and questions, and I thought it would be really helpful if we create a graphic of the things that he said or has asked us to consider. So I went ahead and got the shell created from the study that shows us this past, present, future, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and then 1798, and then describing the different beasts. So one of the questions he asked was, um, why would God want us to be in a dispensation that is not about the story?
It's not about
So
what?
the story. It's
Okay.
not about the story. So
Let's repeat that whole question.
why would God want us to be in a dispensation based on this line that is not about the story? So the story is about which beast? So we've been reading Revelation 17 and 13. What beasts have we been focusing on?
Sixth and seventh?
That's half right.
Fifth and seventh?
There you go.
Okay.
Right? So this is our model, the past, present, future. So we were reading, we are in the present is the sixth kingdom. And we're learning about the fifth beast, and then the future beast, which is the seventh, which is the resurrection of the fifth, which is the eighth. So what he's asking is, why are we now in the sixth? What would that mean?
I didn't catch your question. Can you repeat that?
Why are we looking at the sixth? Why are we in the sixth now? Because we've been looking at the fifth and the seventh, but now we're in the present, looking at the sixth. So if we've been giving all of our attention to the fifth and the seventh, then it must be that we need to know more about the sixth.
Because the sixth gives us more information about the seventh.
Yeah, right. Um, so we know, we look at 5. We know it's was alive, which means now it's dead. And then we know the future beast is not yet to come, but we know whatever it is, it's coming again because of the resurrection story that we've been talking about. So something in the fifth is going to be repeated in the seventh. So we need the sixth to fill in the gap. So what is unique about the fifth kingdom compared to the other 4 kingdoms?
Combination of church and state?
Describe, without using that, what other terms could you use from the Bible? How's it described in the statute?
Mixture of
You mean iron?
iron
Yeah.
and clay.
Yeah, yeah. Made of two parts, iron and clay. I'm just going to two parts, iron, clay. Great. So before that, all those kingdoms were one metal. The fifth kingdom stands out uniquely, having these two parts. But it's still the same beast throughout. We've all agreed with that from the beginning to the end. It's all the same beast. So this history of the fifth, where does it geographically take place?
Europe.
You mean
Yes,
Rome?
Europe. That's where we have, could we call that the old world?
Yep.
Okay. And we know the story of that history. We have the 42 months / 1260. And we have kings and church and state. Okay. So the fifth has a long history. We know 538 to 1798. What was the result of this two parts, this mixing of church and state? What did it produce?
I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for, but revolutions.
Yes, it brought about a revolutions. And the purpose of the revolutions were what?
To
Think of our,
overthrow.
yes, and what did they want to overthrow?
Persecuting power. Pope of Rome.
So with our theme of old world, church and state, revolution, what do they want to, what did the revolution, the French Revolution, right? What did they overthrow?
Is
Monarchy.
it monarchy?
That's part of it. What else did they do?
Theocracy.
Yeah, they got rid of the state, right?
Mm.
So they overthrew church and state. And what did they declare? Now
God
that
didn't
they've got,
exist. God didn't exist. Set up
well,
the goddess of reason.
if you're subject to a king and a pope, and you remove those, what do you now have?
Liberty.
Yes, right? Okay. So, and liberty for who?
Everyone.
For the
The
people.
citizens.
Mhm.
So they declare the universal human rights, right? And they also worked on changing the government. So we're seeing a power struggle, right? And they eventually created a constitution. Their history was kind of, they had multiple constitutions and they had multiple battles to get those constitutions. So Now,
So Kathy,
yes,
so that revolution, who is revolting against who?
who's voting against who?
Mhm.
The citizens voting and rising up against the monarchy and the church.
So it's the war between the people and the power.
Yes.
Okay.
So you can see in the great controversy of pushing back against church and state. That's a violation, right? Against God's sovereignty and against humanity's freedom of conscience. Okay. What can we say about the sixth kingdom? I want to read something real quick though. Oops. All right. So what would be, I'm going to skip that line. If the fifth kingdom is Europe and the old world, what is the sixth kingdom?
USA and China.
Yes. And then we would be the new world.
New World. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So think pre-revolution in the United States when the colonies were first started. Can we say church and state and king?
No,
So when you say pre-revolution, are you talking before
Before
1776?
1776, when the colonies were beginning in the 1600s,
Weren't they church and state beginning?
yeah, they were. And wasn't there a king?
King
Britain?
Yes, we
George.
had,
Yeah,
was
Yeah.
it
British.
not the King of England?
Uh-huh. So they were still, they weren't independent. So we still have a king, and we have church and state at the beginning. So I want to go to something else first. All right, so we're going to take a detour and go to the time before the revolution and get a little bit of back history on what the colonies were like when they first began. So there's basically the colonies were all on the eastern seaboard, and this gave them great access for navigation and for importing, exporting materials and products. So there's examples of church-state combinations. New England, like 3 or 4 of them up in the northern tier of the East Coast, the Puritans came to the Massachusetts Bay colony, and they integrated religion with politics. And they basically had a theocracy. It was just very close to being a total theocracy. In fact, you couldn't vote in that state because they're independent states. You could not vote in that state if you were not a member of the church. And anybody who dissented against the church or the state could be banned or they could be whipped. And they wanted to enforce religious conformity. The and that's just like an overall. There's more details to each different colony. I'm just trying to do like a overview. The southern colonies, like Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Maryland, they were Church of England, which is Anglican, which was the official state church. And they had laws within their states that mandated that public taxes would support the church and the clergy. They had a prescribed method of worship, and any officials in the government of those states, they too had to be a part of the church. Then
Just
there's
a question for clarity.
yeah,
You're speaking of pre-1798, right?
yes.
Okay. Just
Yes,
ask because
this
it's
is
underneath the 17, it's underneath the
yeah,
6 head.
because
Because it's not
we're
yet
trying to
quite
figure
the
out
16.
why they had a revolution.
Right.
So we need to know like what were the colonies doing? What were
Right.
the people doing leading up? And it's not gonna, I don't have all of it here in this one study. It's gonna take a couple studies because there's so much information, and it's complex, and I'm trying to make it synthesize it. But it's just really interesting to see this early beginning that we don't really look at because we're always focused on 1798, which prophetically we get that from Ellen White and we use that as our marker. But what about that history before?
Kathy, if I could add, Elder
Mhm.
Tess did presentation about going back to 1619 about
Yes.
slavery and Sunday
And
laws starting.
in fact, yes, their scholars are like saying now that the 1619 project came out, that we really should consider the founding of the colonies in the United States at 1619, as opposed to other dates. But that's just a new thing, because then when 1619 project came out, the first Trump administration came out with the 1776 committee to give the correct history of the United States. So right then and there's a battle going on the history. So then there were I wanted to read. Okay, so then there were other colonies that were a little bit more diverse. They were a little more tolerant. New York, they legally supported Christian churches via taxes, but they allowed more religious freedom and various Christian groups. Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn, and he promoted separation of church and state. And he allowed, which allowed direct individual worship and the preventing of hierarchical church control. And his was really a model for religious liberty. So basically, the overall colonies at that time was that the established churches received direct aid, tax support, and legal power. The government supported these churches through the taxes, through the power, okay? And then they used civil authority to enforce religious conformity. The colonies were establishing their churches to create a cultural and political unity, as opposed to religious diversity. So they were exclusive, not inclusive. And then there were a few men, William Penn, and then I'm sure you remember Roger Williams. They advocated for separating church and state to protect the conscience, and allow religious pluralism, that every person should be able to worship their God according to their beliefs, according to their conscience. So that was in the early, like Roger Williams was like in the 1630s, 1636 when he founded Rhode Island. I can't really remember William Penn. I think he came later. But so I find it interesting that this setup really basically mirrors the European norms at the time, right? They brought their ideology, whether it's religious or political, and they brought that ideology to the colonies. And then it does set the stage eventually, because then remember, we have some great awakenings in there. So it does eventually set the stage for a future revolution.
Kathy, I looked up. William Penn came in 1682.
Okay, so he was, wow, about 50 years after Roger Williams. That's pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, they banned Roger Williams out of Massachusetts because he was just, totally wrong. He was going to destroy the government with that thinking. So I wanted to share a few of Ellen White quotes about the people coming over. So I want to connect it with Revelation 12, when it talks about the woman, she flees to the wilderness, right? This is 12:14, and it says the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, the church, that he might cause her to be carried away. And then verse 16, the earth helped the woman. So Ellen White's going to give us history about the earth helping the woman. And it says the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So she then talks about in the Great Controversy that people were under such persecution in England or whatever country they came from, because it wasn't always just Britain, that they desired for liberty of conscience, and they were willing to take the risk. And I think it took 4 months of really dangerous sea travel to get to the United States. And so they really believed that she talked about that they had God's blessing to lay the foundation of a mighty nation. So here's showing the people leaving the old world and coming to the new world. But she does mention how that these pilgrims did not yet recognize the great principle of religious toleration / freedom, because the freedom that they sacrificed so much to secure for themselves, they did not grant that to anybody else. If you were in Massachusetts, you could be put in stocks if you did not attend church. And you could be whipped. You could eventually even be killed. I mean, that's how strict. And church back then was all day, an all day event. And I think you stood. They didn't have pews. So it's, you know what I mean? It was just very tightly controlled. And so she says that even though the thinkers and moralists of the 17th century, very few of them had a conception of that grand principle of religious toleration, but she because it's an outgrowth of the New Testament, and it says that God alone is the judge of human faith. So the church in the old world was committed to fighting heresy, right? That's where we get the Inquisition. And so they wanted to control the conscience of people, but they also wanted to define and punish heresy. So they're the ones that decide what you think, what you believe, because back then people didn't have the Bible. They were being told what was in the Bible. And Ellen White calls that one of the greatest papal errors, is that when a church commits itself to being the one to control the conscience of men and women, and then to define and punish heresy. She talks about how the papalism had enveloped all of Christendom, and she quoted one of the leading ministers in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and that he said, quote, "It was toleration that made the world anti-Christian, and the church never took harm by the punishment of heretics." So you can see the very thing that was in the old world, in Europe, in Rome, in Britain, that thinking carried over into the colonies.
So you can say that, can you say that even though they had physically separated from Europe and they had left the Catholic Church or the church and also the Church of New England, they continued with the same spirit.
Same
They continued to
ideology.
do the work that the Catholic Church was doing in controlling the conscience?
Yes. So, like I shared about the different specific colonies, they created these laws that were so melded together with church and state that you couldn't, and so keep in mind the restrictions, okay? Like you couldn't have a voice in the government unless you were in the church, their church, right? It was so conforming, and you were required to give to the support of the clergy, the civic officers who were for safety and law. They had to suppress heresy, and they had to punish it. So basically, the church took secular power into its hand right there in the colonies, which then led to persecution, because people then would start leaving those colonies to escape the persecution. And then there's always the witch trials and all that in there too, which is a totally different story. So Roger Williams and William Penn were two lights in that era. And at the time, the colonies really, they did start growing, and there was more immigration coming. So there were more ideologies and different religions coming. So Roger Williams was pro-religious freedom. It was an inalienable right. I mean, he was like before his time, right? Because he threatened the church-state coalition so much by advocating that you cannot control the conscience of a human being, and that religion is private and personal. And he said, how did he say? Oh, hold on, let me get a quote here. He was the first person in modern Christendom, this is quoting Ellen White, he was the first person in modern Christendom to assert the doctrine of the liberty of conscience, the equality of opinions before the law. And he declared it to be the duty of the magistrate to restrain crime, but never to control the conscience. So many of the colonies, like I said, they had, if you didn't attend, if you didn't attend church, you could be fined or even imprisoned. And Williams called that one of the worst statutes of English code that made it over to the colonies, right? He eventually had to flee, because what did they say about him? Oh, so he left Massachusetts and he denied the right of the civil magistrates to authority over the church, and his demand for religious liberty could no longer be tolerated. And they said the application of this new doctrine, religious freedom, would subvert the fundamental state and government of the country. So it was very, you know, it stirred the pot. And a lot of people were in agreement with him, because they would move up to Rhode Island. So to avoid arrest, he was banished from the colonies, and then he founded in 1636 the first state of modern times. So think about it. Providence, Rhode Island in 1636 was the only country, quote, state that in the fullest sense recognized the right of religious freedom. So in all the world, Europe didn't have it. This is the only colony right now in the United States, or in the colonial period, that is advocating. And I mean, this is the work of the Lamb, right? Coming through. Because this is not happening anywhere else. He writes that the fundamental principle was that every person should have the right to worship God according to the light of their conscience. And Rhode Island became an asylum of the oppressed. There's a Revelation 12 talking about the earth helping the woman. And it increased and prospered until its foundation principles, civil and religious liberty, became the cornerstones of the American Republic. And that's
Kathy, I have a
quick.
question. Did that
Uh-huh.
happen because of the work of Roger Williams?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. This is Great Controversy 88 294.4. So,
Kathy?
did I hear someone?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll
yes.
just say something about Roger Williams because we spent like 3 months there.
Mm-hmm.
That about the equality thing for the civil land, it was really interesting because there's the big river that goes up through the town basically.
Mm-hmm.
And on the river, okay, so people are coming there and they're getting land, right? Well, they made it like a law that all these pieces of land would be like riverfront, and then
Mhm.
it would be a long narrow thing. Then you could go up the hill and have more property like that. But it wasn't set up so that one person could just grab a whole bunch of the riverfront, which was
Riverfront.
really important down then because everything was moving by the water basically, or covered wagon kind of thing. So
And
yeah,
they had to pay for their land.
yeah,
You couldn't just swipe it.
right. Yeah, it was a pretty quality thing. I was impressed by that.
Yeah. He had a really good relationship with the indigenous peoples. He learned their language, and when he settled that state, he made an arrangement. He paid for the land. And then anybody else who came had to do the same thing. It was just really, I mean, they helped keep him alive in the winter when because he had to flee in January in Maine, freezing cold weather, and they helped him to survive. And he had already established a relationship, and so they knew of him. So yeah, it was really remarkable, and it's like one of the teeniest little states we have, right? And I love it. Um, so let me see. Okay, so we have so the study that Elder Perlmutter did was, he's got these two titles, right? Prophetic gerrymandering is on the thumbnail, and then on the transcripts or on the title, it calls determining the boundaries of the fifth and sixth kingdom. So in looking into this a little bit, I just kind of came across some Bible verses, and along with this history and his topic of these boundaries, and I want to share chapter 12 again. And so after the earth helps, the verse that talks about number 16, the earth helped the woman. Okay. And then, because my Bible has a divider there, another subheading, and so it kind of feels like it ends, but in the original Greek, there's no paragraphs, there's no like periods and sentences, it just all reads as one. So if you read, I'm going to read verses 16 and 17 together. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. So that's the King James. And I found another translation. There's like maybe 4 or 5, but one of them is the Amplified, which is from the Greek, and they amplified the sentences. So they talk about, okay, so the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river, the flood, which the dragon had hurled out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to wage war on the rest of her children / seed. So my question is, okay, wait a minute, let me read the rest. And okay, so it's those who keep and obey the commandments. And then verse 13, verse 1, and the dragon stood on the sandy shore of the sea. And then it goes on and says, I, John, saw a beast coming up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. So I'm wondering, I don't have an answer. I haven't done any, I'm just throwing it out here for our consideration and thought. It looks like, because it looks like the fifth was there for a while. It didn't die right away. In those early 1600s, because we have 1798 as the deadly wound. So I don't know if that's where he's gonna, where the study is gonna take us with Elder Parmenter and others who have more skill at this than I do. But I find it interesting that the people that left Europe still came with the thinking of the fifth beast. That's what I'm seeing. So anyway, kind of tuck that away. And I just want to put that out there.
It still had a work to do. It still had a work to do to totally break free from it.
Yeah, because it seems to me like if there's people that are escaping from that kingdom over there, and then the dragon's angry and goes after them, maybe tries to reset up something here in this land, because it looked pretty much like what was in Europe. Monarchy, church and state, right?
Yeah, but those revolutions don't come till towards the end of it all.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. The revolutions come later. And there's this huge there's this whole thing there that looks like still old Europe. instead of the New World yet. And it's a huge process, and there is a battle. You can see it in just the different histories that I've been reading about the 7 Years' War, and then the American Revolution, and the Constitution, all of that stuff. There's so much going on in there.
I always saw
But
it
I think,
as this period where there are those that hated being persecuted and came here, and now they want to be the persecutor. And then there's those that were persecuted that come here and don't want anybody to be persecuted. So you have the two ideologies that come here.
yes, yes. And so it's the battle, right? It went from the land, the sea, which is Europe, to the land. So the angel had a foot on the sea and a foot on the land, and then the dragon had a foot on the sea. And then if he made it to the beach of the United States, the colonies, then he had a foot on the land to a certain time.
Hey, Kathy,
Yeah,
I also think of it as when they are fleeing Europe, I think we have to see it in two dimensions. We have to see the woman who is fleeing the persecution. But when they land on the sea, we also have to see the government that was formed, the beast. So that how they formed that government, initially it was a colony. It resembled the government of Europe. And the
yes,
people who were part of it, we can see the woman, the people who had the idea, Roger Williams, of tolerance, but there were other people who continued with religious intolerance, and it took how many years, from 1600 to 17, almost
like
150
years.
Yes, to actually understand that principle and fight against the intolerance. But we have to see the woman and the beast.
Right. And, this is like I played that song, the hymn, Our God is a Mighty Fortress. That was Martin Luther. So there was some light going on in there in that time period, that in the Dark Ages, in that persecution time.
The Enlightenment brought all these
And the
ideas.
Enlightenment, yes, that was more in the 1700s, I think. Before that, because 1600s were really they were isolated colonies, and there were different countries on the continent. So it wasn't just Britain. There was Spain, there was France, the Dutch. So I mean, it was like a free-for-all coming for this continent, all these different countries. And when we get to the Revolutionary War, I mean, there's literally a global war going on about the continent of the United States. It's really fascinating. And you can see then the importance of this land, this history of the 6th. So I thought we could. I wanted to put up here 2 parts for the. So there's two times in this history of the 6th. If you go to the very beginning in the 1600s, you would say it's 2 parts, it's church and state. And I think that that stayed for a long time. We always talk about the 2 horns being republicanism and Protestantism, but our story is there is church and state in this history prior to 1798. So that's where I'm like, I would be moving I would be creating a waymark prior to 1798 as part of the present. not knowing that I don't know that that's right, but there's a history there. Because the revolution in France, where did it get its impetus? Whose revolution came first? The French?
American.
The American Revolution, right?
Mhm.
So we had a revolution, and it was about conscience. And the first Bill of Rights talks about religion, religious freedom. So they wanted out from a king, and they wanted out from religious subjection. So I'm going to put church and state up here. Oops.
So when you put church and state here, here is 1798. You're
It's-
saying the history?
No, I believe that, yes, I believe that that church and state mindset stayed there. And that's why the Bill of Rights was written, right? And that didn't come until 1789. It was ratified in 1791. So, and then of course we have more history about church and state as we go through our history. But I think I'm suggesting we can put church and state there because from what I'm seeing in the revolution, that's what people wanted. Because it was not only because at the time, in the early colonies, the Quakers were being abused, they were being hung, they were being shipped back to Britain, the Catholics were being attacked. I mean, there was really strong religious, you're either a Protestant or you're not.
We
So
learned
it was-
today that it still exists. It really just went into hiding, just like racism.
Yeah, I think there was a morphine, and we know the history of right, in the Civil War, both sides were calling on God, and the penny had "In God We Trust," and everybody thinks it's a Christian nation, and so that ideology is still there. But we can see it in the colonies before they even become the United States, before they're prophetically seen as the Lamb.
So to back up just a little bit, you read that Bible verse where the dragon spewed the water of persecution. And so you have one beast spewing that water and then another beast swallowing that water of
Yes.
persecution. So that beast, would you put it there where you're saying two parts? One is spewing, one is swallowing.
The sea beast was spewing from Europe. It tried to overpower with ideology of the woman to try and take control, religious control, right? And so the land beast, was a refuge. And so that's how the earth helped the people in Europe by providing an asylum.
So, but
for
the
them to come to.
the earth, speaking of beasts, the government is not able to help until they have drafted this Declaration of Independence and all of that to declare that.
I think on a bigger scale, because if you go too far into your details, you lose the big picture. The purpose was to have a place of religious freedom, and that continent was the only place people could go at the time. Everywhere else was kings and popes. It wasn't the ideal, but it was a place to go to.
So physically they came here to America, but you have stated, you have beautifully laid out that even though they physically moved out, that spirit of intolerance continued. The
Yes.
Puritans, they continued.
And so there's, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so in practice, in the 1600s, America was no different in practice. from
Right, because
Eastern Europe.
they had an ideology that they were captured by. Okay, think of it.
But they were not aware of
Hundreds of
that.
years. They think they're doing the right thing because the Puritans said the Anglican Church is not pure. You know, you've got all these idols and stuff, so we're separating from you. So they thought they were the real thing. So there's no perfection, but you can see the laying out of the groundwork for this continent to be that place, which is what God's purpose, right, would be
So
to have a kingdom, have a land that is free of a king and free of a pope.
so that laying out, and I'm bringing that point to bring it back to the issue that we had yesterday about the prophetic gerrymandering.
Hmm.
Just moving being careful not to move the waymarks, the prophetic waymarks. So that's where you're marking the two parts.
Yes, at the beginning
Okay.
in the early colonies. And we prophetically say the United States is recognized as a nation among the world, but hey, back 1776, the Constitution was 1789, so 1798 is a few years later. So to me, there was a battle. Pardon?
Prophetically, we can see where it is marked. The waymark
Yes,
is placed there because of the work of the revolutions that was taking place in America. Is that
yes, and we go by the 1260
okay?
for that fifth kingdom too.
I'm saying
But
that
I
because
think,
Elder
you know what I
Pamela
mean?
was saying, yeah, because Elder
Yes,
Pamela was saying that we should have a reason why we put 1798 there.
yes. So I just wanted to, I got caught in those verses and I'm like, well, what was the history of the colonies? What was it like? There's a lot I didn't learn in history or forgot. Um, but um, I think it helps to understand the ideology of that time leading into the revolutions. And then what happened? Did those revolutions get rejected? Did they get forgotten? What were the fruit? What was the fruit of those revolutions? So this is, to me, it sounds like this is the history. How did he put it? Um, so we have revolutions. We know we have a French Revolution, and so they're going to overthrow church and state, just like the French. And they're going for equality, right?
I think, would you say the fifth, in the culmination of the French Revolution, they came to be totally anti-God because of the religion that was forced upon them.
Exactly.
So you had to
They
have
did,
both. You can't, so that was a big success out of the Enlightenment.
yes,
But you had to have both in the right way. And that was the
yes,
goal, was to get both in the right way.
yes. So they wanted freedom of religion. Um, we knew we had to change the form of government, and we had a constitution.
So Elaine, I'm not sure I'm understanding what you meant by having both. Can you clarify that?
What'd you say?
You said they had to have both. So
Oh,
what do you mean?
well, because the French Revolution, they got to where they were totally anti-God. And I'm not suggesting God in the government. I just mean you can't completely throw off God. When you look at the Ten Commandments, God, you have God and humanity. So whatever that develops to look like and what it's supposed to develop to look like, I think the French Revolution started liberty, but it also took them to a liberty without God, which was not right either. I don't know if I said that right, but they became atheists.
Yeah, well, with the papal control, I mean, it was horrific and corrupt. So you could see why they want to get rid of it.
So the fruit of French Revolution in France, it brought about atheism, right? Which is not what is supposed to be, because it threw away the principle that we are talking about.
Or anti-God.
The anti-God completely threw away God out of their lives, out of the government, and out of their public life. But what happened in America? What's the fruit of the revolution, American Revolution?
That's the next study.
Oh, okay.
But I have a few quotes to read from Ellen White. So she talks about the Declaration of Independence, saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know the contradiction of the men who wrote this document and to what's written on the document, right? It's a work in progress because James Madison had 600 slaves, enslaved people. So he's talking about equality, but doesn't, and then of course the indigenous peoples of the continent. So she goes on to say then that the Constitution guarantees that there can be no violation of the conscience. And she reads from, it's actually Amendment number 1. No religious test shall ever be required as, I don't know if it's number 1. I'll take that back. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So what did we just read? Hear about the early colonies? You couldn't be in the government unless you were in the church. There's like a loyalty test, right? Except it's religion. So they put that in the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion and prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the colonies, they existed for about 150 years as independent states. They had interstate commerce between each other. They put tariffs on things with each other. They each had their own militia because they were an independent state. They were a confederation. So they only met once or twice a year. The Articles of Confederation. Then they would meet, and they were afraid of federal central power, and so they left by adding the the amendments, the Bill of Rights, to the Constitution, was to help secure sovereignty to the individual states, which is why individual states now set their own laws for elections, not the federal government. And they were, they each had their own religion in their state. And if you go and look up the individual states, when they became states, and read their constitutions, God is in there everywhere. But the federal government said, no, we're not doing that. So there's that conflict there. So the states are wanting one thing, and the federal government saying, no, we're not going to make a religious test, and we're not going to establish a state, a federal religion. But we've seen what's happened through history, but that's our pre-knowledge. So, and this is Great Controversy 295.1. Then she goes on to say, the framers of the Constitution recognize the eternal principle that a person's relation to their God is above human legislation, and their rights of conscience are inalienable, which cannot be taken away. Let's see what else I have here. So she then talks about how, as the United States became, after this Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War, and then they've got their Constitution, the Declaration was to the world, basically, saying, we're starting a new nation. And everybody's watching them. It is unheard of that somebody this small, this group of colonies is standing up and saying, we're going out on our own, which is why it took till like 1798 for them to be officially recognized. And then emissaries were starting to be, because they wanted to connect to, they wanted allies, because, you know, Britain could come in and just plow them down, right? And so they were making allies with the French and just different countries. So it was really a global event. It's more than I ever realized. So the news spread, and so in GC 88, she says that as tidings spread through the countries of Europe about a land where every person could enjoy the fruit of their labor and obey the convictions of their conscience, thousands flocked to the shores of the New World. The colonies rapidly multiplied. By then, even Massachusetts, by special law, offered free welcome and aid at the public cost to Christians of any nationality who might fly beyond the Atlantic to escape from wars or famine or the oppression of their persecutors. So there we go, we have Revelation 12. Thus, the fugitive and the downtrodden were by statute made the guests of the commonwealth. And in 20 years from the first landing at Plymouth, many thousands of pilgrims were settled in New England. So 20 years after Plymouth, what was that, 1620? So that's 1640. Thousands were just like a flood, right? People exiting these other countries. So then she goes on, continuing in great controversy, about the beast rising up out of the earth. And she talks about, instead of overthrowing other powers to establish itself, it must arise in a land that is not being ruled. And it couldn't be crowded and couldn't be connected to the old world. And so it had to be the Western continent. It's kind of like yeah, it's interesting. Well, never mind. So the nation that was rising in 1798 into power gave promise of its strength and greatness, and it attracted the attention of the world. And she's saying that that prophecy of 1798 is the United States. She goes on then, as we're familiar with, that the lamb-like horns associates with youth, innocence, and gentleness. So do you take that at 1798? You would have to take that at 1798 because that's when it comes up, in 1798. The Christian exiles who first fled to America sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance, and they determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. So it depends in the history where she's talking about. Maybe that's now Roger Williams and William Penn. So not everybody was, I mean, they had the church and state combo, but not everybody was happy with that. I forget the name of the woman in Massachusetts that was all about religious freedom, and she was banned also. I can't think of her name. Catherine Hutchin? I don't remember, but she was in there too. And people were getting tired of it, right? They're tired of being subject to a king and a pope.
Was it Anne Hutchinson?
That's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
I thought so.
Yay.
Yeah, she's in the book I've
Okay.
been reading too. Yeah, bam.
Okay, good. Yeah, she was something else. So she said, goes on that the Declaration of Independence set forth that great truth. The Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government. People are starting to waken up that, wait a minute, I should be able to grow my own food on my own land and make my own decisions, and I should be able to participate in the government. And so the Enlightenment's coming in, right? And so all these new things are coming in. It's really like an increase of knowledge. So let's see, the right to self-government, providing that representatives are elected by the popular vote to administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted, every person permitted to worship God according to the dictates of their conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the foundation principles, these principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to this land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations on the earth. So that's pretty much just kind of like a drone flyover of kind of giving some back history, maybe wondering where that prophetic boundary could be. Where would we, if he's suggesting that we gerrymander something, maybe there's something in there to that. I don't have the skill for that, but I just wanted to give us some history and there was I wanted to read, there's this little book about
Where would you mark it becoming a republic, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people?
well, if you go by the Constitution, it would be 1789, in my opinion, because that's when they got their first president. By the way, only 2 states voted. Two colonies voted for the presidency, and the first one with George Washington. So,
What did they write in 1776?
so the Declaration of Independence, but they were still a confederacy at that time. And there was a war of independence. They still had to fight.
But they had already declared. It's when you see the
So
scene.
they declared and they gave their grievances and they explained to the king and to the world why we are declaring independence. And think about it. It's been 150 years. They've been doing pretty good. Thank you very much. But then after the 7 Years' War, Britain's feeling really good, and now they want some money back for that war to help the colonies. And then that's when trouble starts. And they start getting hands-on. So that's
So
the next step.
from there on, they were fighting to maintain that declaration. Did you say that? Because
Yes, they were fighting to make it. Yes,
You
yes,
have
they,
drawn the line in the sand, and then of course you
Mhm.
expect a fight. They are not gonna give it to you, hand over to you like that.
yes. Kind of. Let's see, anyway, this little book's about the Constitution and other founding documents, and they just had kind of see if I can find the quote. It was really good. So it was the Constitution created the doctrine of federalism, which defined the relationship between the individual states and the new federal government. And that had never been done before. All the other countries, there were monarchies and the religion, but it was mostly monarchies. So this relationship, so the states said, okay, we're going to give the federal authority significant powers, but, and with the Bill of Rights, but allowing the states to retain significant degrees of sovereignty. And basically that was a template for the European Union. decades later, hundreds of years later. And also that he said in this book, the Constitution enshrined the political idea of popular sovereignty, declaring in the preamble that the document had been the work of we, the people. And that reflects the importance of the consent of the governed, right? You can see the seeds of a equitable, what's the word I want to put? Community, a coalition, a working of we the people, for the people, of the people, by the people. All of that concept there is waiting to be birthed and to be developed.
So do you think that maybe in this process and the Constitution and through that process that 1798 with the taking captive of the Pope is like the nail in the coffin to religion and monarchy? And that's part of why it's marked at 1798? Because all that stuff went on under the Fifth Kingdom.
Yeah, prophetically, prophetically, we accept that date. But I think there seems to be there's some kind of overlapping. It's not just cut and dry.
Well, I think there has to be an overlapping anytime because you don't just go from black to white or white to black. You go through the gray area to get to the good or bad.
Right.
Yeah, but you also see two stories going on there, the 1776 and the 1798. See the story of the state and the story of the woman, because 1798 is pretty much how it is noted. It's the story of of papacy, the story of woman, the papacy being deposed, and the people rejecting the authority of the supremacy of the Pope papacy in 1780, the story of the church, isn't it?
And yes,
in one sense.
Then in 1798 we have Millerite, right? We have Miller, right? And that starts God raising up a people.
He's another prophetic marker for that date.
Yes. Yes. So that's the internal, I guess we'd call that one. So anyway, we have these comparisons, and I think, looking at the revolutions would be helpful for us. And I forgot wait a minute, there's one more thing here with, where's my mouse? Okay. Changing of they went to a republic. Whoops, typo. And so did the United States. So we have some really nice comparisons here.
Explain Republic under the Fifth. Explain Republic under the Fifth. Oh,
the French Revolution? Yeah, they eventually their first constitution was a monarchical republic, or a constitutional monarchy is what they called it. They had numerous constitutions, but they eventually declared themselves as a republic, I think in 1793. They had their first constitution in 1791. They declared the human rights in 1789. So, you know what I mean? It's messy, it's complex. It's a lot going on.
Is that the history of Napoleon? Is the rise?
Yeah, see, and then they had that issue. So their revolution, they're different, but they're still the same because their purpose is to overthrow church and state and change the government, human rights, all that. But they had a different outcome because here comes Napoleon, what, in 1804?
Yeah, but that Napoleon is useful in 1798 because he's the one who goes on to depose the Pope.
Yes, but you still had another emperor. So anyway, that's what I had to offer, and just looking at different things and trying to understand.
So, quick question, Kathy. So you talked about the Puritans, the beginning of America, and how they did not understand the principle of religious liberty,
Mm-hmm.
and it took about 150 years plus to even come to a point of understanding religious tolerance. And then we have in 1777, they formed this, the framers, they formed this government, which is based on religious civil liberty and religious liberty. Would you, and then we talked about how they did not quite, okay, it was there in the letter, but they were not living up to it. They did not quite understand, live out to the principles of religious and civil liberties as seen by how they interacted or related with the indigenous people and other people. So would you say that as time went on from 1798, would you say that that light of those two principles, did they understand them and live up to them, or did they fall back to, intolerance?
So, in my thoughts, trying to see the big picture in the great controversy, and I see the 1776, 1787 is the Constitutional Convention. Took 2 years to get that ratified. 1791 is the Bill of Rights, because they wouldn't ratify the Constitution unless they said they would do the Bill of Rights for the states. There is the big picture of this is a good work. It's just, look how long God has had to work with humanity to get things done, and working with the people that are there.
You take it
And
down
I think,
to the individual
pardon?
level. You take it down to the individual or human level of our own personal experiences. The
Right.
things can be bad before us and us not take action until they progress into such a bad that you can't refuse it. If that, I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but so you have all this history of humanity as a whole that it had to be allowed to play out to get so bad that it would be seen clearly and then could be overturned.
Yeah, and I think the and one of the another thing Elder Perminder made a comment on, which like confused me. I'm like, what? No, you're just throwing, something in the gravy. Um, that we need to check, like we had placed that the head is alive, but the beast is dead for the sixth kingdom. He goes, now we need to know if that's right, and if so, what does that mean? So
Yeah.
there we go. So there's a lot of, I feel like we're in, Jello land. There's a lot of things that are squishy. I think um, the fact that these people that were creating a new nation, I mean, the Federalists only lasted in 2 presidential elections, and then after that, nobody wanted anything to do with them. That's when the two-party system began, because they were so much British type of thinking, and they were elitists and things like that. But the people wanted more say. And so it is a progressive work. It is on a national level, but you can see the good that's there. But I see also a battle um, in that period. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think Elder Tess laid that out really well in several studies based
Mhm.
through religion, the religious side, and also through the political side. She showed the
Yes.
struggle continued always all the way through 1798. The struggle was
Right.
always there. It's who had I think it comes down to who had the seat and did that power, that
Yeah.
ideology have the seat.
Well, I'm hoping to have something about the revolutions and even more detail about exactly what were people thinking during this early period before 1798. And let me tell you, if you haven't read Thomas Paine about him, you need to look into him. This dude was way ahead. And I know what Ellen White says about him, but
Yeah, she said he was
this,
evil, the son of the devil, or something
yeah,
like that. And
this
he
guy
actually
was,
did a lot of good.
oh, he was all of, I mean, he is what spurred on the American Revolution because he wasn't speaking honky tonk elite language. He was speaking the language of the people and
Yeah.
explaining why a monarchy is not good. It's always bad. The people always suffer. And he had his Common Sense published, and I think in 1 month it sold 100,000 copies. And by the end of the year, 500,000 copies. It was being read at the coffee shops. It was being read at group meetings. I mean, people were reading this book, this pamphlet, and he donated all the money to the revolution. He didn't take any of the money. And he actually was in part of the revolution of the French Revolution and the American Revolution, and he met all the people of
Hey,
that time.
Kathy.
Yes.
So you're talking history. So you're talking Ural settler history and because I come from the Native nations,
Mm,
so I wasn't included in that. That history is not my history because
yes.
they weren't seen as citizens at the
Mm-hmm.
onset, and neither
Yeah.
were the black
Yes. There
slaves
is.
came over. So I just needed to put that out there kind of thing.
Well, I'm gonna be bringing those up in the next study with the American Revolution.
Oh, cool. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot involved there. And I said I don't think the indigenous people even were citizens till like 1938. Something crazy.
Damn.
It was a
We
long time.
we should have
And
asked them.
then,
We should have asked them to put us as citizens as soon as they stepped on the earth right there.
yeah, right? So it's, and then women and enslaved, all of it. And
Right.
that is to me, that's the underbelly of the lamb.
Yeah.
And it's of minorities and it is part of that history. But I think if prophetically we're telling a certain story,
Yeah. And I see the point that you make about a good work.
mhm.
And yeah, I agree with that 100%. But I
Because I was
think,
struggling with, I saw Parminder put on the board some study, the lamb is good, dragon is
yeah,
bad. And
yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but what about this, and this? How, and I was like struggling, how can you say the lamb is good? And so I had to then step back and get a bigger picture. And then I started seeing it. What they
Oh, she froze. Did she freeze or is that just me?
No, she's frozen.
You
Okay,
froze.
make sure it wasn't me. She'll be back.
But that's an awesome froze. State of frozen, being frozen.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
That's pretty funny. The pizza was this big.
Yeah, she disappeared, right? So she'll be back.
Yeah, I think she's gonna have to log back on or something.
Yeah. And I posted an article in the chat I saw the other day about the Republicans becoming disenchanted with working in Congress and leaving to run for governors in their own individual states, thinking they can get more accomplished for the party. And I was connecting that in my head with what you were saying about how the church state thing didn't go away in the individual states. Just wondering if that was.
I'm back.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm having this problem. So I forgot. Oh, so where I was at.
Turn your camera back on and then I'll spotlight you.
Okay. Okay. So what I was struggling with the lamb being good. How is that when there's so much stuff there when you zoom in? So I thought, okay, I need to zoom out. What made it what it was? And literally the Constitution was unheard of. There was nothing like that. Were the men perfect? No. Were the women involved? No. Were the indigenous? No. Enslaved? No. All of that. But the main thing, you couldn't have equality without the Constitution. It had to come first.
Somehow they pulled off in all their badness and the
Yes.
mixture of the goodness, somehow they pulled it off and gave us this period of time of reprieve.
Yes. And you had, when you read the original sources and the willingness to die for freedom, to lose their property, their wealth, everything, they guarded their liberty and their freedom that's why they were very suspicious of the federal government. They literally, the president at that time had more power than the king in Britain. It had more powers. I mean, the president can, do things that they were blaming the king for a lot of things, but Parliament was basically controlling most of it. They were the ones doing the enacting of the Stamp Act and all those things that were taxing the colonists. But to have we the people, and it rang throughout the world. It was a template for other countries. So there's the good work, right? In all the mess that we know about it, it's still there. And I was satisfied with that when I was during my studies. I'm like, okay, I see it. There is something there that is divine. That is.
Think about this on the terms of Satan, and then take it down to individual human level. When a human is, got real bad ideology or criminal or what have you, and that's just their whole mindset, and they do something and they get in trouble and they go do time, often they come out with revenge on their mind. No.
Or revenge or change.
Yeah. Revenge and want to come back with a vengeance upon those that they feel did them wrong, even though they were the ones that did wrong. And look at Satan now as in the fifth head, and he's battling to remain, and he takes a hit, right?
Yeah.
And he comes back with a vengeance.
So, we literally say the Pope died in 1799.
Right.
And he was, overthrown 1798. But it's an ideology, right?
Yes.
That didn't die right away, I don't think.
What now? What'd you say? That what didn't die?
That ideology didn't die.
No, I don't think it ever really died. It just didn't have the seat of power.
Yeah. And it's really, yeah, it's a really interesting history. And I'm going to try and start on the next one will be like the early days in the 1700s now. They're getting closer to the the Revolution and the Declaration of Independence and what the colonies were like and what they were thinking, what they were, how they were looked at in the world, how they looked at the world, and
So
someday
it was a progressive battle to overturn a bad ideology.
you know,
Kathy,
I like.
are you reading a book are you following a book? Or
I am reading numerous sources. Yes, I do
okay.
have.
Do you have a book that you would recommend to us?
There is one. I'll put it in the forum.
Okay, thank you.
I'll give you the title and the name, and it's really good. And the book that I'm looking at does bring in the conflicting ideologies and brings in the indigenous people, brings in the enslaved, brings in the women, um, and how the white elite men were the ones who were pulling all the strings. So
You
and
know,
you can see the suspicion because when they had their Second Continental Congress to rewrite or to revise the Articles of Confederation in 1787, it turned into a constitutional convention without anybody knowing. So the state representatives showed up for meeting A, and then Madison and Adams and all those guys show up and say, hey, we've got this constitution we'd like to submit. They're like, wait a minute. That's not why we came here. We would have sent different delegates. We would have had time to put together our own thoughts on what this constitution should be. And you haven't even brought it up to the people in the state. So, I mean, you can see from the get-go
So
how
Kathy,
it's kind of a little shaky.
Kathy.
Yeah.
So my mind, I'm always when I see the story of America or any government there, as it is told in the story of great controversy, the church is tucked in there. I think you cannot hold on a second. You cannot tell one story of the government without also looking at the story of the church, the experience of the church. I think they are told together. I think we are required to see how the church understood the external and how, because in that story of the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, we see the story of the reformers in there. Martin Luther, early reformers, and all of that. And in the story of 1798, we see the story of William Miller.
Yes. But I'm not combining those stories right now. I just want to know about American history. But it is included in my story, but it's not the focus. The focus was the lamb. And then what led to the revolution and what was the fruit of the revolution? And that's what I want to try and answer.
So are you going to tie it in the end to see what becomes of the lamb?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Are you going to tie in the story of the woman in the history of the lamb? To kind of have like the cause and the effect?
I don't know.
Otherwise, why do we spend so much time looking at the politics?
Because we want to know what the seventh kingdom's going to be like.
Politics, is that
why do we want to know what the seventh kingdom is going to be like if the woman is not in that story? Why do we want to know the story of the seventh kingdom?
You're talking about the good woman, which is us. And you're saying we have a role in the politics?
We have a role in all of that.
That's not my story. That's not my story. My story is doing the history But you can see that church and state is in the story, but it's on a bigger scale. It's not on an individual. And I don't know maybe that could be your study.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, I see it like when we go to Revelation 17,
Mm-hmm.
the picture that we're given, the snap picture that we are given there, is we see the bad woman, the good woman, and the beast.
Right. Remember, when you look at that graphic I did, we had 5, 6, and 7. The story that we've been studying is 5 and 7. And
Mhm.
now we're looking at the 6th because there's a gap. There's a gap of information. And not everything of the 5 repeats.
I
Not
think
everything.
for me, the way I think about it, because it's what works for me, what I have figured out for me anyways, is that the whole story is a whole bunch of stories put together, layered over layers over layer over layer. And as you continue to learn some of the individual stories, like she's touching this story, it's a piece of the puzzle that helps form the fuller picture. It adds to building the full picture of the story. That's how I think about it anyways.
Yeah.
It helps me.
Well, and we're using Isaiah 46:10. We have a past, present, future in those verses of 13 and 17. So that's where our focus is. And that's where the focus is in the scriptures, is basically those beasts. And so what can we learn about the 5th that repeats, and not everything repeats? God's specific, and to me it looks like it's church and state. But we got to find out. We got to look into the revolution. We got to look at the ideologies. And I just want to provide history. I'm just bringing information and then add in a few of my ideas about the gerrymandering or the boundary of the 5th and 6th. So, but I think it fits. So, but
It is necessary, I think, to see. So it's good to see that the transition from the overturning of that ideology. And it didn't just happen overnight. It was both ideologies came to this land in advance of this land having that power struggle
yes,
to get rid of
and
that ideology.
And that's where I was like, when I was reading the Revelation 12 leading into 13, and the dragon was angry and went after the seed. So the woman's in the Europe, and then he leaves and goes after. So, and I could be totally misinterpreting that, could be totally wrong, but that's how I'm seeing it could be. It's my suggestion. I haven't proved it, but it just, you know.
Are you saying that the dragon came to US
The 5th.
to the 5th? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I
Because
agree
it-
with you. Yeah. Mhm.
Because it followed after the seed of the woman.
Yeah.
And so if the earth is protecting the woman, the seed, then that beast is going to follow to the next location. And I mean, it's like, okay, if you have a beast, if you have something rising up out of the sea, they have to have something to stand on.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so when I stumbled on the Amplified and it said that Satan stood on the beach, I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Where is that verse? I've never read that verse. And I went back to the King James and it's not there. But I looked into it and it is based on translation. And then the word is the same. It's missing like one letter. To mean something else, but it's the interpreters who are looking at the context of the story. It's why these 4 or 5 Bibles would put in there that it was
Where would you mark that, sand or the beach? Would it be in the U.S. land or still Europe?
Yeah.
It would be in
It
the
came
U.S.?
over from Europe. It was
Okay.
following the people
All right.
who were fleeing, and
Okay.
it's now on the beach. And
Okay.
John's in vision. We have John standing on the beach. We just know that's a time period, but it's not that they're standing next to each other, because the verse says that it just shows John still in vision, and he sees a beast rise up out of the sea. He
Mhm.
doesn't say, and it's standing next to me.
So when I was reviewing Elder Parminder's, first presentation, the border between fifth and sixth, he ended with, so the beast rise from the sea, stands with John at the sand at 1798, which you're saying is U.S. He comes all the way to the U.S. Or he says he's heading to the land. So I'm not sure now that I'm discussing, but he's not able to because, he goes through a deadly wound, right? A death and deadly wound. So that's a good question. We have to figure out where that sand would be. Is it still in
Yes.
Europe or?
No, I think it's before 1798.
Okay. So
And it is him. It is the fifth coming to the sixth before its deadly wound, because it's going after the people that are fleeing. The
Okay.
woman who's fleeing.
So what would be the land then?
Sometimes we see it. Sometimes we see it as a point, but as you have been telling us, it took 150 years to see that, to complete that transition from the fifth to the sixth.
He had to keep them from escaping because they were escaping the hand of that ideology. And
it wanted to bring its ideology to this land.
Yes. Prevent people from escaping. You can escape geographically, but that power wanted to rule.
Yes. And then I like that, and this may not be the right thing to, prophetically do, but in Revelation 10, there's the angel with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land. And when you have then the dragon is on the sea, and then it comes to the land, it's copying 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land. So it's doing Europe and the new land, new world, old world and new world.
And what you're looking
so we can say that the sand and the land would be the new world. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because the fifth is following where the people are going. And then they went ahead and set up the exact same thing that was in Britain in the 1600s.
And I think that's the point that I was trying to ask you, Kathy, because they came over here and they set up the same thing, because in the change that we are talking about of this principle that you talked about, the principle of religious liberty and civil liberty, they had not understood it. So they built something according to their own minds. What they had in their mind, their image, the image of their mind is the old foot that was on the sea. That's what they built in the new world. And
we all know how hard it is. We know how hard it is to change an ideology, right? I mean, they thought they were doing the right thing.
And I wonder if that comes down to
their bias. Yeah, their bias.
No, not the bias, but the law being written on your heart, because there are people that they may not be religious, but they genuinely care about humanity and equality. And that had to play some sort of a role, because that would be the ideology of the good woman.
William Rogers, when was being kicked out by the Puritans and was being treated well by the indigenous people. So who had the principle there?
Exactly. It's Roger Williams.
Roger Williams.
And the indigenous people, they did not. Yeah.
Yes. So, they love their neighbor.
So you had people that had that principle on their heart, whether they and look at what Satan did. Satan used the fifth kingdom to kind of try to wipe out religion, try to wipe out God, because that when you see the French Revolution, it comes about and makes, everybody becomes anti-God because of what the Catholic Church had done all that time. So now he had to work with both, I think, as you come to here. It's like, okay, that didn't work out. Trying to wipe out God through religion didn't work. I got to go bigger. And comes here and wants to wipe out through politics every bit of anybody that cares about humanity.
Kathy, as I'm reviewing this first presentation of South Africa, I think Elder Parmenter meant sand directing as a symbolic for time, just like he's using wilderness as time. So be sand would be for 1798 and wilderness will be 1260, I think. Yeah.
Yes,
Just
but the earth is the land, and the earth saved the woman in the wilderness.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm
I agree.
using the symbol differently.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, like
Okay.
always, lots to think about.
Yeah, it's a lot there, and it's very complex.
Now that you stirred the pot, Kathy.
Hmm.
Good discussion. Really
Yeah, I
good.
appreciate your participation.
Mhm.
I kind of, I'm just like, let me just throw this out to everybody and see who can come up with something. Um, but, the history facts are good to know, and understanding what life was like there, and just ideologies. They were everywhere. Um, and how do you make a nation, right? I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Other nations in Europe, they were constantly just being overthrown, kings over kings, and then boundaries changed, and people died, and just suppression and oppression and poverty, and
Well, the
um,
common person couldn't be
no.
part of the lawmaking process. It
Talk
was
about
always
collateral
it was
damage,
always
right?
yeah, it was always the nobility
Mm-hmm.
family and blah 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 and blah blah
Right.
blah. Yeah.
What about that excluding others? Because every time you exclude some in your community, then you end up going back to the thing that you're running away from.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
That's what happened to the indigenous people. I mean, they were excluded from eventually.
Yes. Yeah.
They brought that with them. It shows in the history and it reflects on you could see the evidence in the Native Americans' history not being represented as a part of the nation, and neither were the enslaved black people that were coming over. It had to be a process for us to to grab the government by the collar and say, "Look, we're here. We need representation. So put it in your whatever law you guys are put together, and so people recognize us, kind of thing."
One of the outcomes of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was minorities started using that very same language for their
Hmm.
rights. Indigenous, enslaved, and women. They were all starting to use that then. And even during the revolution, when those three groups were in the revolution in various functioning, and they were now participating in this fight for freedom, and it just made it expand, right?
And
So
it
it's
was the
it's so
same.
it's a good backlash,
Yeah.
right? So you have a healthy backlash to all this oppression and control. But then what happens when you do get those rights? We see history has backlashes all the time. Anytime something good happens, the movements, civil rights, women's rights, all that, there's always a backlash. But then that seems to create a good backlash afterwards. You know what I mean? So it's really kind of it's all progressive, right?
The
But
backlash
I did.
goes against revolutions because the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and Stonewall, all of those were revolutionary movements for equality.
And I
Right.
think it
And they
goes back.
backlash against it. And I think I'm understanding better through the difference between revolution and civil war, because civil war is kind of done on it's very vague, but done in a very deceptive manner in ways that seems to happen during a republic, and to turn it back to a monarchy or an empire, where a revolution fights against that monarchy for rights, for human rights.
Yeah, I see the revolution as a positive backlash
Yes.
to the oppression,
Yeah, you can
right?
put it that way too.
There's
Yeah.
always a cause and effect
Yeah.
when there's a
Isn't
I
that the
wasn't
same
saying that,
idea?
but yes, I was saying the Civil War is more like the backlash. But
Yes.
yes, you could say that too. It's still a backlash against it's the two ideologies that are
Yes.
fighting for human
The
rights
fighting. Yes.
and for this power to suppress and oppress and persecute and dominate and all of that. And to, as it was described, was to shape humanity to their will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
I think Mary had a point too.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing that Elaine said, that you see those two ideologies. You see, it's always a battle between the truth and error.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have the truth succeed through a revolution, you expect a counter revolution. Always be the case. These two aspects of, Christ and Satan, truth and error, revolution, counter revolution. So you have freedom, and poor people are free and all of that, and then you expect those people who are fighting for private rights rise up because they feel like they have lost something. They have lost their independence. They have lost their ability to be above other people. And that's what was happening in Europe. The Fifth Kingdom is interesting to study because you had the elite, you had the monarchs, you had the nobles, you had the knights, and all of the ruling class. And the people, the peasant who were subordinate, rising against that setup. And that's where the revolution came from, the grassroots underneath, because they had been suppressed so much, they had no rights.
I think the deception that if we were to look at our time now, the deception, what is the far right fighting for? Aren't they fighting for freedom?
Personal rights.
Wasn't that what Elder Tess laid out, was freedom versus equality? They're fighting for freedom, and they're fighting this freedom with people that don't know past, don't remember past, or ignore past, or what have you, and they have to be awakened. And God was awakening people as they could to see that this freedom is a false freedom. And so, because they use freedom to deceive, the idea of freedom to deceive many people, the ignorant, or however you want to say. I don't mean it in a derogatory way.
That's an important point.
Yes, well, what they are doing, that the way they say freedom, they point to the base that you are poor because of those immigrants over there. They have taken all your jobs. You are suffering because of transgender and all of that. While the real reason, they are not explaining it to the people. It's the rich getting richer. But they tell you are not able to pay your bills because of the poor immigrants who have taken up your jobs. They misdirect. That's the part of the deception. They misdirect the people. They tell you they have a scapegoat. In our case, it's the immigrants.
Yeah, it's propaganda.
Well, I think too, when we look at the revolution, we became a nation of laws.
Of what? A nation of what?
Law.
Okay, law. Okay.
Okay, and it didn't fluctuate like in Europe with kings. that law could change all the time at the whim of the king. And so due process and all of that was established and for good, right? Because before there was no law, there was persecution and very little rights. So what started out as good can be turned. So like the United States was founded on Constitution, it may go down because of the Constitution being turned and manipulated. So these are the things we want to see how the seventh head's going to control the world and finish the conquering of the glorious land. I don't know if it's been finished or not. I don't remember. But anyway, gone over time. So with that, I'll go ahead and close in prayer. Thanks again for all your comments and participation. Really appreciate it. And we'll go ahead and close in prayer. Holy God, we praise you and thank you for the opportunity to worship together, to study together, to share our thoughts with freedom and give our opinions, that we work together to understand this history that we are living in and to understand our past history. We're so grateful, Lord, for all the truth and light you have given us and are leading us into. We thank you for your many blessings. We praise you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Happy Sabbath, everybody.